Hi, everyone. It's Victoria Field, co-host of Metabolic Health Summit. And today I'm interviewing Dawn Martenz of the Charlie Foundation. She's actually their recipe formulator and a self-taught keto chef and the mom to Charlotte, who has been using the ketogenic diet for the last 10 years to help her daughter treat Dravet syndrome. Dawn, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really looking forward to diving into your story today because it's an incredibly inspiring one, and you've taken such a difficult situation and turned it into something so positive, and you guys are thriving today, and you're doing such great work for the Charlie Foundation as well, and helping other families and creating amazing recipes. So I want to take it back though to sort of like where this started for you, because I know it's been a long journey, and it's been 10 years, I believe, that you've been on the ketogenic diet.
Yep.
Your daughter Charlotte was diagnosed when she was only 21 months old. So if you want to take us back to when this sort of started to unravel and what sort of happened, at what point was the diet recommended?
So Charlotte was formally diagnosed with Dravet syndrome when she was 21 months old, which also happened to be the week that my son was born. So we,
That's a
you
lot.
know,
Wow.
a few things going on in life.
Oh, yeah.
My son was born with some complications as well, and we were in the NICU with him. And I happened to know that it had been about the 6 months that was needed for the genetic testing to be processed and analyzed. And I knew that should be back during that time. And so from the hospital, NICU, I actually called the neurologist that was treating my daughter at that time and begged him to tell me if he had the results back. And he really obviously did not want to tell me, and he was confused as to why I was in the hospital, but he hadn't been notified. So we ended up coming to the NICU.
Wow.
And sitting with me.
Coming.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness.
The nurses had pieced pieces of it together and realized that I think they told him, what was happening with my son, and he came up to the NICU and sat there with me for a couple hours actually. And it was, I ended up telling him, I said, I already know the answer. I just want to hear you say it. And so that was it. And he just simply nodded his head and said, it's Dravet syndrome.
Wow.
We're going to work through this. And, now that we know there's, other things we can try. And one of them was the ketogenic diet. And being about 5 days postpartum, and also dealing with, my son's yet still unknown issues, I just could not even begin to wrap my head around how on earth we could possibly manage her with diet therapy at that time.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I mean, that's a lot.
It was too much to take in. And, I'm thankful that he did mention it at that time. I wish that he had presented it in a way that was more pleasing or approachable. It was not, I don't know if there's any right thing to say to somebody in a situation like that, but that, it's not an easy diet, and it's a lot of, at that time it was still heavy cream based for that hospital. Eggnog shake, the old fashioned kind of.
Like a 4-to-1 kind of classical ketogenic diet ratio, I'm sure.
So it seemed very impossible to me. And so we turned it down.
Yeah.
And we were actually granted compassionate use status for clobazam, which at the time was not available in the US. And we were able to purchase it from Canada.
Mm.
And that seemed to work for her for quite a while. And that's how we got through the next couple of years. By the time she was 5, we had moved. This all took place in New Hampshire, where the kids were born. We moved from New Hampshire to Virginia for the first time. And it was there that the doctor said, we should look into the diet. This was a second doctor, because the clobazam had begun to become ineffective. She had built up a tolerance to that medication. It's a benzodiazepine.
Right.
So the effectiveness of it goes away after some time. And we had also already tried stiripentol, which was another medication that we bought from France. And that was neither good or bad. It just didn't seem to do anything for her. So after exhausting those two options, which are, kind of them at that time were the best options for somebody with Dravet syndrome,
Yeah.
we were in a position where we had to begin the diet. She actually was taken from school by ambulance to a local ER. And in that ER, the attending physician told us that what she was having was not seizures, but maybe some type of form of Tourette syndrome. And I
This
just
is like
thought,
years later after initial diagnosis, right?
you are not a good doctor, and I'm leaving.
Oh gosh. Oh no. Oh my goodness.
The whole scary talk about signing her out against, recommendation from the doctor, and in the parking lot, I sat with her in the car, still having nonstop seizures, which were myoclonic seizures.
Jeez.
And I called her neurologist in Virginia at Children's National, and I said, I'm coming in.
Yeah, we're doing
Here
it.
we come.
Good for you. I mean, at that point, she was, I think at one point you had mentioned to me, she was having about 1,000 myoclonic
You
seizures.
couldn't count. They
That's
were,
unreal.
even during an EEG, when they captured the myoclonics, it was labeled innumerable.
Wow.
There was so much seizure activity in the form of the myoclonics, which when they first began, we thought, well, they're just small seizures. They don't seem as bad as a larger tonic-clonic seizure.
Right.
And I was not too worried about them. I thought, okay, these are just little seizures. They can't be that bad.
Mm-hmm.
That was naive, of course, but it turns out that those seizures were the kind that affected her development the most.
Wow.
And it was once explained to me as static, like on the radio, if you can imagine bad static.
Yeah.
Every word that you're hearing, you're only hearing a portion of it. And that happens all day long through every thought and experience that you encounter during the day. That's how she was between the age of basically 2 and 5 years old, which is a critical time for development.
Goodness. Yeah. You guys
So,
have been through so much as a family. I can't imagine, like, as a parent and having your child obviously with seizures, but then also your son kind of going through that. And I'm sure you guys really had to sort of band together and then get to this place of like, okay, well, you guys had been through multiple medications, I believe, at that point. And numerous, maybe even, I believe maybe
Many.
6, 7, many. And, you showed up in your neurologist's office and said, okay, let's do this. What was that like for you at that moment? Like, where were you at in terms of, did you feel like, okay, well, I'm sure food, you just don't think like this is going to be something that will make a difference. Especially when this is, years before maybe it was as prevalent as it is now as something being used
It
for
was far
epilepsy.
before that.
Right. So this is sort of like you're shooting in the dark almost. This is unmarked territory. Everybody eats food day to day. How could this make a difference? What was kind of going through your mind as a parent at that moment where you said, okay, I'm going to do it?
So at that moment when we decided to do it, there was truly no other option for her. So it just became the only thing we could do.
Jeez.
I had, there was one webpage for Dravet syndrome at the time, which was the most horrible webpage you could possibly imagine. At that time, because of the genetic testing having just become available, there was only a small list of about 500 kids worldwide that were listed on this webpage, and most of them had passed away.
Oh my goodness.
And so that was the only information I had to read online in 2005, 6, 7, 8 time frame about Dravet syndrome. And then as far as the ketogenic diet went, the only 2 web pages were Matthew's Friends and the Charlie Foundation.
Yeah.
And both of them were versions of their websites, which were much less information filled at the time.
Yeah.
I still picture the homepage of the Charlie Foundation from 2007. And I looked at the same 4 or 5 recipes that were posted, which did not include measurements. They were just ideas because
Right.
it was not ketogenic recipe sharing at that time.
Right.
And the neurologist put me in touch with another parent that sent me a few emails. And a typical day that her son would, have on the ketogenic diet. And I just thought, okay, well, this is just how it's going to be. So my husband and I, we went to the hospital with her about a month later when we had to stay inpatient to begin the diet. And they started her with the traditional fasting protocol. And then began feeding her small meals, about 100 calories at a time, to get her into ketosis, which she did rapidly. She easily went into ketosis. That was not without difficulty, though, because at that time, the kitchen staff in the hospital was weighing the food for the meals, but they were not weighing it correctly. So we actually had a very scary situation 3 days in where she became so overly ketotic and then acidotic that she was unconscious.
Oh my gosh. Oh my goodness. So they were essentially
it went from no diet to way overboard.
Right. Oh my gosh. And then you guys kind of reeled that in. It took her a second to kind of get back to a good place and find balance, right? And once she did,
recover. And it was a blessing in disguise that happened, because in the hospital, we worked with the dietitian and the staff there and already started revamping their keto program before we even went to the hospital. And we took a much more hands-on approach with learning how to calculate and weigh the meals before we left, which is common practice now, but back then it was not.
Right.
So it helped us really just learn how to manage the diet for her quickly.
Yeah.
And it was, not without expense. She lost weight initially
Yeah.
that was significant for a 5-year-old. And we had, a lot of trouble finding the right spot for her, which ended up being a 4-to-1 ratio for a long time.
Oh, wow.
But that's how I began working on recipes because there was nothing available.
Right.
There,
Right. You guys had to make it as
there
you
was
went.
no Instagram.
There was no Instagram, no recipes. I mean, the Charlie Foundation is just this beautiful, like robust resource for people now with like recipes, largely because you've lived it. You had to
Mhm.
figure out how do we come up with options that taste, just as good as maybe the original, using fat, which I can't imagine it, like what that was like for you not having any resources out there at the time, really. I mean, thankfully there were a couple of sites at least saying, hey, we're also going through this. Here's sort of where this stands now. And that since then has developed dramatically. And once you guys did get into a rhythm, what was that like for Charlotte? Like where, what happened to her seizures and where is she today? Because, you guys are like 10 years in now and she's doing quite well.
So our rhythm became me taking pictures of the food that she liked.
Mm,
I put them in a photo album. She wasn't speaking well yet, even at 5 years old. And she would point to things that she liked or would be willing to eat, which was huge.
yeah.
So that actually became the first keto cookbook.
Okay.
That-
Wow.
It was in 2012 that I think that was published. I mean, it may be 2011, but at that time I had already started corresponding with Beth and asking her for approval, to share these recipes. And that's how I began working with the Charlie Foundation. And the cookbook that was published came out at an interesting time because that was always intended to be a cookbook for kids on a medically supervised ketogenic diet.
Yeah.
Yet very quickly, I started getting comments and questions from people that I knew were bodybuilders just from the types of questions they were asking. I kept
Right.
thinking, why are you contacting us?
What is this about? And isn't it so funny how it
Bodybuilders,
evolved? Yeah.
go away.
And
But
that's
there was
funny.
always that beginning interest into the world of keto for, general health purposes, and I just was not there mentally. I just
Yeah.
was too wrapped up in the medical side of it because that's what our life was. So I wrote that cookbook and it was published, and I began posting recipes on the Charlie Foundation, which is every single one of those recipes is something that was made for Charlotte.
Wow.
And she has eaten. There's, to this day, there's
Okay.
never a recipe that I make just because.
Right.
When you,
Right. They've had use and they're really great. I mean, we've posted some of them on the Metabolic Health Summit platforms and people love them. I mean, because even now, I mean, families who are on a ketogenic diet for a medical reason, like something like epilepsy, it's still, it still feels like what can we have? What can't we have? And you as a parent being able to create something like that, I know it means the world for other parents out there who
yep.
are are in a similar place to where you were at one point, but they have some of these options that unfortunately weren't available to you at the time. So that's huge. Like you taking this this situation, and now in turn you're helping so many others in sort of navigating this. How's Charlotte doing these days? Like,
She's great. So through the years, what I wanted to say was that her diet began at a 4-to-1 ratio.
mm,
And through the years, she became so efficient at producing ketones that she naturally weaned herself down to a very modified version of a ketogenic diet therapy now, where we are no longer weighing the food. She was considered a super responder,
yeah,
if you
okay,
will, to the diet, because within 72 hours of her being in ketosis, even though it was too high of a level of ketosis, she had stopped having the myoclonic seizures.
wow,
So my husband and I sat in the hospital staring at each other for 6 days, wondering when the other shoe was going to drop.
right,
And from that day forward, knock on wood, oops, oh no,
there you go.
sorry.
No, that's okay. You were saying,
So from that day forward, they have not come back in the myoclonics. She
wow,
still continues to have a general tonic-clonic type seizure, maybe once a year. And we've gone through puberty,
wow,
which is
it's huge.
a huge deal. And her health is fantastic. And the diet is something that is never going to go away for her completely. She will always remain on some version of a ketogenic diet for as long as she lives.
Yeah,
That is, we know there is no going back ever for her.
yeah,
So this is proven to be the most effective treatment. It was the only treatment that gave us results and relief from the seizures. No other medication ever came close to this amount of control for her. So
wow,
when people ask if I feel like, is it the medication that she's still on to this day, that is controlling her seizures, or is it the diet? It is 100% without a doubt the diet.
yeah, absolutely. That's amazing. I mean, especially, with Dravet syndrome and what you were mentioning before in terms of
Mhm.
like cases of it. I mean, she's really like an outlier. She's doing phenomenally well in comparison to, using the diet alongside, the drug that she's
Mhm.
on. Have you guys, at one point, was she off medication, or did you guys sort of make the decision with her neurologist, like, let's use this in combination with? What was that process for it, like, for you?
That's been a long, long process for us. It's always our hope for her to not be on medication,
Yeah,
but the several times over the years that we have tried to wean the medication, we've always experienced some breakthrough seizures.
yeah,
So we decided the best course of action for her would be to remain on the medication she's on. She's not had an increase in her medication since she was about 8.
oh, wow,
And at this point, it's still within a therapeutic range, but as she's growing, it's actually becoming a less of a therapeutic range. So also to cover the puberty time period,
right, right.
we did not want to rock that boat.
Yeah, the hormones and everything that's kind of happening, and you
That can
guys
be.
have finally found this sort of mix that
Mhm.
works so well for her, and she's thriving, and you guys have come up with all of these great recipes and things that make it. I mean, she's got to have sort of, where is she in terms of like creating recipes with you now? I mean, are you
Oh,
guys working on this together? Does she enjoy it? I mean, there are endless options, right? Because fat
love.
does make food taste good. So there's that.
She loves cooking. Actually, she's taking home ec in school. She's in 8th grade, and she loves cooking food in school. She loves to come home. She has a couple small assembly type meals
Yeah.
that she makes for herself. One is a low carb tortilla with peanut butter and butter in it. It's not
Nice.
complicated, but it's, it's her own thing. That's
Yeah.
her own comfort food.
That's awesome.
Uh, and she likes to make smoothies. So, I have to help her a little bit with that. It's not completely independent.
Yeah.
Uh, but she has a lot of input into what she wants to eat now.
Yeah.
And most of the time, our meals are just so simple. It's hard to even call half of what I make a recipe. It's some form of cooked protein and a simply prepared vegetable with some fat on it.
Yeah.
And it's how we eat almost all of our meals, all of their lunches that they take to school. Both of my kids eat the same thing for lunch. And leftovers are our favorite thing ever.
Yeah.
But it's very simple. So, I don't spend a lot of time trying to recreate things, or bake things, or pre pre-prep things. It's very, very simple. And she has her favorites, and she lets us know what she wants to eat. And, you know, it's all, it all works for us at
Yeah.
this point.
That's
It
great. I
doesn't
mean,
feel any different than
yeah.
anybody.
That's awesome. And that's so great that she's into it too and enjoys cooking now and is exploring that, because it is going to be such a big part of her life,
Mhm.
continue to be such a big part of her life. But you do make some pretty good fat bomb recipes, I will say. Like, even though you say they're all simple, which they
But they
are, they
all.
totally are, but they're so fun too. Like for the holidays and things, you come
Yeah.
up with such creative ideas that might seem simple, but mean so much. I know, to
Mhm.
families who might not have been able to think up that because maybe they were sort of told that the diet is really difficult, which it is. It can be, especially when used as a medical therapy. You do have to be really careful, as you well know. But you've really, I think, opened a lot of eyes to where you can go with that at the same time. So, I mean, speaking of that, what would you tell to parents out there who might be going through and dealing with the same thing, like going through what you've gone through now? What advice would you give to somebody maybe considering the diet or not even knowing that it's an option?
So, out of all the meals that I make at home, everything that we eat on a daily basis, each one of them can easily be turned into a 4-to-1 ratio meal for a medical ketogenic therapy. The more simply you eat at home, you don't need products, you don't need special ingredients that are, maybe coconut flour and almond flour seem a little foreign to some people, but not as much now
Yeah,
as
you can
they
get them
used to.
anywhere now.
It can be anywhere. You don't have to go to the crunchy health food store anymore.
Whole Foods has them, and Whole Foods is basically Amazon,
My
so
giant,
yeah.
yeah, my giant has everything I need, my regular grocery store. And the more simply you cook and the more basic your food is at home, this, even in the most extreme option as a 4-to-1 ratio ketogenic diet therapy that needs to be weighed to the gram, is not that complicated. There are creative ways to increase fat for younger kids. Charlotte is a master at taking oil by a syringe, like medicine.
Wow.
A lot of people will put it in a little shot glass, but the syringe just, it's
Easy. She's a
the
keto
master.
boss.
You can travel with it, and
It's a good
that's how
idea.
she would take most of her fat, so that her meals were not really very fatty, if you will.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
was protein, vegetable base, and it's not all swimming in butter or
Right.
another fat. It's just, standard kid food.
Yeah.
Pick a few favorites that, you can't live without, and figure out how you can adapt them. for her, unsurprisingly, it was chicken nuggets when she was 5.
Hmm.
I There's a chicken nugget recipe that works fantastic. It can be made in a big batch and frozen. And, a couple things like that take a few, minutes of extra effort are definitely worth having. And also figure out where you can eat out.
Right.
I am a huge, huge advocate for being able to go out to a restaurant, even at a 4-to-1 ratio, and be able to eat out and enjoy, the social experience of it. I have been in many restaurants with my little pocket gram scale
That's
and
great. You got to do what you got to do.
weighed food on the table. You get a few strange looks, but you know, I feel like anything flies now. You can do pretty much anything you want. But
Yep.
you know, there is almost always something that you can order in a restaurant. It may not be your most ideal, nutrient dense, perfect oils and fats, meal, but the social experience and the life part of it is just as important. So I think those are my biggest tips, or keep it really simple, work on a few favorites and figure out how you can eat out,
Yeah.
because everybody needs takeout.
Yes, it's true. And you can do it. It just takes a
Yeah.
little extra effort, obviously, to figure that
Mhm.
out and what works for your family. And you're clearly proof that you can, I mean, you've gone through such difficult times and you've taken that difficulty and turned it into something that is really a lifestyle for your daughter and your family. I mean, low carb in general, I know you guys sort of lead that lifestyle. How's your son doing these days?
He's
I know
great.
he's great. He's
He
good.
had at 4 months old, he had a corrective surgery for Hirschsprung's disease,
Right.
and he's one of the few patients that never ended up with a colostomy bag, and so he is completely unaffected at this point in his life.
Wow.
It was just
Great.
she had to throw in, when he came into this world.
Wow, talk about a curveball and a few curveballs that life threw your way. But I mean, what an inspiration you are to so many other families out there who might be sort of feeling like there's no hope, but you're living proof, and your family in Charlotte, being the incredible keto warrior that she is, are living proof that there is a way, that it's worth a shot to try it, and even maybe use it alongside the current medication that she's going through. So I think my hat's off to you guys, and thank you for everything that you do for families everywhere. And the Charlie Foundation, you've been such a huge resource for them, and just providing what you have. Where is that headed for you, the Charlie Foundation specifically? What's the future, for the organization, and where do you hope to go alongside them?
I'm not going anywhere.
I know.
Staying with Jim and the Charlie Foundation forever. I've been with them since 2012. My goal is to get them back on Dateline. It's time
Yes,
for an update.
it's a great idea. We need to make that happen. However we
I
can support
know. I
that.
know. So we need to get them. Sorry, my
That's a,
phone battery's dying, so we should wrap
uh-oh.
up.
Okay.
But we really hope to be able to bring the private ketogenic specialist, expanding that list so that in areas of our country and all over the world, families have access to a qualified nutritionist that can help manage diet therapy so they're not left to their own devices.
Right.
That's hugely important for the Charlie Foundation. And then, of course, our big project this year was moving the Keto Diet Calculator program to a HIPAA compliant server, which opens a lot of opportunities as well. So for Giving Tuesday this year, which is December 3rd,
Yes.
that's all donations for the Charlie Foundation will be going to those two projects,
That's incredible.
and also translating some of our education materials into multiple languages,
Oh,
uh,
wow.
which are used in clinics all over the world. So
That's
it helps
incredible.
really expand the reach of ketogenic therapies to a lot of people that really could benefit.
Absolutely. I mean, you guys are doing such good work, but making that HIPAA compliant, and I mean, you're helping so many dietitians implement the ketogenic diet with people all over the world. And if you're a brand, you have food or, ideas or whatever, you guys are very open to being inclusive of that, and what sort of, as the ketogenic diet evolves and there are new companies trying to provide alternatives and make things right, you guys are very much open to conversations around how to implement that into the mix as well. So, and kind of adapt as this whole keto movement sort of evolves over time. I think it's been really interesting to see where it's headed. And you guys are always at the forefront of and leading the charge, really, when it comes to education around the ketogenic diet. So thank you guys for all you do. And thank you, Dawn, for just your incredible work over the years, and just with your own family, and just stepping up to the plate to make that available for other people. I mean, that's huge. So it's such an
Yeah,
honor to be partnered with you guys. And thank you for taking all the time today to talk about your story.
no problem. I'm glad to be here. I can't wait to see you in January.
I know you'll actually get a chance to visit with the Charlie Foundation at MHS
Yep.
2020. You can find more information about the Charlie Foundation, charliefoundation.org. We'll also be posting all kinds of information about the organization. You guys are a huge source of inspiration for us. So thank you for all you do, and thank you all for watching. All
Thank
right, we'll see you
you.
soon.
Bye.
We'll see you in January. Bye.
Bye.